Got Jeffrey Clayton on the phone. Jeffrey is, of course, with the American Bail Coalition, and this is something we talked a little bit about last hour with the members of the Camden County Sheriff's Department, and we're going to be talking with Jeffrey about this as well. Is this order that came down from the Missouri Supreme Court, a judge putting this in place back in July. This new law was intended to prevent nonviolent offenders from being stuck in jail merely because they cannot afford bail. And so we welcome to the program the executive director of the American Bail Coalition, Jeffrey Clayton. Good morning, sir. Great to have you with us.
Morning. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And let's talk a little bit about, before we kind of get into where we are now, let's, number one, talk about the American Bail Coalition, and also kind of go back and preview what happened back in July of last year. And it's not something that's specific to the state of Missouri, as I understand it. There are a lot of different states that have tried to put these types of laws in place to help people who may not be able to afford bail. So let's talk a little bit about the organization and then kind of where this all started.
Absolutely. We're a trade association of insurance companies that underwrite bail bondsmen throughout the United States. So we make sure they do what they're supposed to do, that they can cover the bonds if folks abscond. You know, what we work on is bail reform, primarily that's been going on for the last, 5 to 6 years in large measure, to either go to eliminate bail altogether or to severely restrict the ability of judges or the system to require defendants to post bail in order to be released. And so, our argument has been that all bails and conditions of release should be on a level playing field. In terms of Missouri, a task force met for several years, which we were unaware of. Many interest groups in Missouri were unaware of, and certainly the public was unaware of because it wasn't open to the public or announced that this bail reform process was underway. The result culminated in the issuance of a Supreme Court rule last July, which severely, in our view, restricts the discretion of judges to impose bail on defendants in Missouri. And so you're seeing an uptick, somewhere in the range of 30% of defendants who are getting out free when otherwise they would have had to post bail, and some of which would have remained in jail.
It's interesting because you look at this from a couple of different scopes. One of which is obviously the fact that the perpetrator, goes in, commits a crime. If it's a nonviolent offense, is that correct? If it's a nonviolent offense, they could possibly be released without having to pay any bail. So it puts them back out on the street to continue to commit crimes if they so choose to do so. I would imagine maybe it's a deterrent to some folks because it's like, well, here I got in trouble. I went to jail. I couldn't afford bail, so I'm out. So maybe I ought to just keep my nose clean until I have to go back for court. But in a lot of cases, we've heard of, and I heard of one particular instance in the state of New York, a gentleman who was arrested over 130, 135 times. I think it's closer to 140 because he knew how to scam the system, because he knew that if he got picked up, he was going to be put in jail. He didn't have the bail to pay to get out, and there was no way that he could get out, but he was released anyway based on the fact that the type of crime he committed was a nonviolent offense.
Yeah, we're certainly going to see that, but you got to keep in mind the Missouri court rules apply to all felonies too.
Oh,
so,
really? Okay.
There has to be overcome a presumption of a free bail in felony cases where judges don't seek detention, which they rarely do in Missouri. So, and you're exactly right. What you're going to see is repeat offenders gaming the system because they'll know that I'm going to get out as long as I just continue to do low-level thefts like this particular gentleman in New York who said, my job is to steal $200 to $300 a day, and that's what I do, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
And, we're hearing from law enforcement in St. Louis that that's already going on, that this crime problem we already have is just simply going to get worse as a result of these policies and not any better. And we're sending a signal to those people that would do those crimes that, it's fine to go ahead and do that.
Yeah. And essentially then that just that makes matters worse because you're seeing a person coming in for a crime and possibly going out and then committing another crime, and there they are back again, and then they get out, and there's no real end to it, I guess. What would be a situation where the judge would have to say, okay, I can't release you this particular time? Would it have to be something as serious as murder, or what would it take?
Well, I mean, they have to be, make specific findings that these particular people are dangerous enough and that no other conditions will work before they can get to bail. And that's just a hard hurdle to get over because people have to put on evidence. So it can happen, over time. And generally what we're seeing is that, I call it rob one, get one free policies, because you can go out and do it the first time and get a free pass, and then maybe the second time we'll start thinking about some bail. But then again, a lot of times people will post that bail and get out. So, we're just weakening the system for these repeat offenders is what we're doing. Interestingly
enough, I had members of the Camden County Sheriff's Department in last hour, and we discussed this very topic, and they too kind of feel that it's not necessarily the way to go because it does encourage offenders to possibly become repeat offenders. And there's no saying how many times someone who's been in jail and has been allowed to get out because they can't afford to pay bail has, gone back in for one reason or another. And, again, I guess there's maybe some concern. It kind of maybe in their minds, the criminal, the person who is in jail, does it give them a false sense of security, a false sense of confidence that, hey, I just beat the system and now I'm back out, so now I'm going to do whatever I want. And if I can get away with this, what's to say I can't get away with something a little worse?
Yeah, I think so, and that's definitely what the sheriffs testified to at the hearing last week of the bill to repeal the rules. And, one sheriff basically said, we arrested the same guy twice within, several hours, and he got out both times.
Right.
Another sheriff talked about a guy who, had a firearm, was dealing meth across the street from a school, who, basically wrecked their jail, ripped, exposed plumbing out of their jail, broke TVs, all this sort of thing. He was released on his own recognizance. So, I don't think law enforcement likes it, and I just think it's a problem.
And also, and let's just be fair about this, there are plenty of bail bondsmen and women around this country, and this is a job, and you're kind of cutting into what these folks do, as I guess in a lot of situations, it's their living.
Sure, that's an issue. Obviously for us because that's how we make our living. But the reality is they're not doing. They could do cash-only bonds too, right? It doesn't have to just be us.
Right.
You could tie up people's property or require them to have sufficient sureties. And here, it's us. It's not anything here, and that's the problem. Let's get out of jail free cards.
Actually, we've got a caller on the line. Let's take a quick phone call here. A question or comment from you, caller. Good morning. You're on KRMS.
Good morning, KB.
Good morning.
Reality is if these people would stay out of trouble, they wouldn't need to make bail. And I'm sorry, but your guest is just kind of blowing in the wind to me, and that's my opinion. Thanks, buddy.
Why do you consider the guest to be blowing in the wind? I mean because.
Well, they're trying to get people off and go out here and recommit whatever they did before. I listen to the news on your station every morning.
Right.
And these people are arrested over and over, or even in another state for doing the same thing. It was on there this morning, stealing cars. There's better causes in this world than what your guest is doing.
All right, thanks for your phone call. Jeffrey, how do you respond to that?
Well, I've certainly heard worse insults in my career than blowing in the wind. But, I think, maybe I'm not saying directly what the caller wants me to say, which is, yeah, these are soft on crime policies that give people a free pass, period. And, maybe that's what he wants to hear. And I think he's right. So we'll just leave it at that.
Right. Well, here recently you met in the state of Missouri and you addressed the state legislature. There was a meeting held in the state as far as the legislature is concerned. And I'm going to take a quick break, Jeffrey, and come back and we'll discuss what was said and what legislators are feeling about this, and if there is a true need to rescind this type of an order and to make it a little tougher for the criminals out there. Jeffrey Clayton is our guest. He is the executive director of the American Bail Coalition. Glad that you took the time to talk to us this morning. So there we were. Obviously, we've got a new legislative session going. There was an opportunity, Jeffrey, for you folks to go up and meet with legislators and kind of talk about the current situation. What was the message that you had sent to the legislators, and what was the reaction from legislators? Were there a lot of folks kind of behind your efforts? Were there some questions? Were there folks that didn't think it was necessary to try and maybe rescind this judge's order? How did things go?
Yeah, it went pretty well. I think what's going on is that Representative Justin Hill is legislation to repeal the rules, basically to start over. Our message was we think restricting judicial discretion is inappropriate to impose bail, that, all these bails and conditions of release need to be on a level playing field. We don't want to presume in favor of one thing or another. The other thing that we discovered was that there's basically an informal policy coming from the top of the judiciary to force judges not to do bail. That this is a bigger thing than simply this legislation. Now, there was one ranking Democrat who basically said, no, judges are still doing bail, judges can still do bail, and it's not a problem. But universally, the 6 sheriffs that testified said, no, that's not what our judges are telling us. Our judges are telling us that the message from on high is don't do bail, follow the rule, and that was the intent. So, other than that, I think the main message that Representative Hill put out that I think got a lot of reception was that, hey, this is the job of the legislature. I mean, we need to have a public process and we need to be involved. And the Supreme Court needs to sort of stay in their lane on this and let us, jump in on this because there are many important issues of substantive law when it comes to, bail and bail reform.
We talk about all.
So I think it went pretty well.
And well, that's good probably for you folks to hear that sort of thing. And what's interesting about all of this is, again, when we talk about people being involved in committing crimes and how they're looked at by, say, law enforcement or judges or what have you, there's really no blanket approach. Each individual situation merits its own opportunity to be discussed and looked at and to try and do what people feel is best for the offender, for everyone involved in this entire process. But looking at things again, you hear a lot of stories where, and I mentioned again that they're looking at maybe issuing parking tickets to people in the city of Boston, and when you go to pay your parking ticket, it's not based on the fine that you committed and the amount that is required to pay that particular fine. They're talking about possibly trying to do it based on people's income, because they say, a lot of low-income people, they can't pay a $120 fine. And I guess in a lot of cases, if people keep their noses clean and try to, abide by the law, then they won't have any issues or have any problems here. But it seems like here in, I don't want to say recent years, I guess it's always probably been a topic of conversation when it comes to people getting in trouble and going to jail and their ability to bond out or what have you. They seem to run into issues, and we hear this coming up constantly about, low-income people versus people that can afford, certain things. And really, I guess what it comes down to is regardless of your income level, if you stay out of trouble and you keep your nose clean, then you won't run into this particular situation. But it kind of seems like we're falling into this type of way of handling situations more often than not. They say that blacks, Hispanics maybe are targeted more by police. And then you get into the whole situation of income, someone's income. Is that a reason why or why not, as far as why they should not have to pay bail in order to get out of jail? What's an alternative to this, Jeffrey? I mean, rather than just going back to the way things were, is there any sort of like middle ground? Is there anything else that you can look at doing to try and make this process somewhat, I guess, not so financially taxing on people, as far as, you get in trouble, you go to jail, you want to get out of jail, this is what you have to do. Is it a case of all or nothing? What are we talking about here?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, we need to take a look at some solutions which we have proposed. The problem is we never got a chance to do that. And your issue with, obviously being poor, it makes all of life harder. When you go down to the car lot, it's harder. When you go to the grocery store, it's harder. And so, I don't think the criminal justice system is any different than that. Of course, we're talking about justice, so it should be a higher standard. Things we've proposed in Missouri is, things like what we call nuisance bail. Some of these bails, sleeping on a park bench, blah, 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 putting a $100 bail on somebody doesn't really incentivize them to do anything. And certainly, if I post your bail for $100 and you don't show up, more than likely, I'm probably not even going to bother with you. I'm just going to assume that I lost my $100. And so the system and the economic incentives start to break down. The other thing in Missouri that's happening is people are spending longer in jail awaiting trial than the actual penalty. And so, you could be facing 30 days in jail and wait 90 days to go to trial, and that's a problem.
Right,
and so
sure.
there's things like that we've looked into that we think, can get at this problem without, saying that multiple, felons are going to get a presumption of a free bail.
And legislators as a whole, now you talked about somebody who was very supportive of what it is you're trying to do here. Do you think this is going to be a big deal? Is it going to gain some traction in the state legislature during the legislative session this year?
It seems to be getting some legs, and we'll just have to see. I mean, there's another effort by another legislator to basically try to fix it, try to clarify that, hey, we look at public safety, and so I think something's going to be done. It's just a question of what this session. But yeah, it's gaining momentum, and not just Missouri. I mean, other states are saying, hey, this is a problem. Maybe we shouldn't do this. And some states are actually repealing very similar provisions to what's in the Missouri court rules.
You are the executive director of the American Bail Coalition, and obviously you deal with issues in other states. What are some of the other states talking about? What are some of the other things that they're looking at doing to try and fix this problem and do it in such a way where maybe they don't go back to the old way of handling it, where the bail is just too much for somebody to pay, or you don't want to just turn around and give them per se a get out of jail free card?
Sure. I think one of the themes has been don't touch felonies. Don't get into all these changes. When we get to violent felonies and higher level charges, we don't want to do this. I think other states are looking at doing exactly what we said, which is restoration of judicial discretion, to leave everything on a level playing field. We saw that certainly in Alaska, which repealed a misdemeanor law. There's been a lot of activity in New Hampshire and a couple of other states that are looking at this. And I think, the solutions that we propose, and there's many others that we could discuss in Missouri, something we need to do. We need to look at some data and some information and figure out, what's going on. We found out in Michigan when we did actual study that, 18% of defendants cause 82% of pretrial jail costs in Michigan, which means it's a small group of repeat offenders that are causing us the big problem. And we just need to make sure that that's not the group that we're allowing to take advantage of some of these policies.
What are some other areas that you think need to be looked at here? Of course, criminal justice reform is something that has been talked about by a number of people. There are people that use that as part of their campaign when they're running for office. I want to make sure that we're not putting people in jail that don't necessarily need to be there. Is there a need to reform the way we look at the current laws on the books, for example? Certain things that maybe just don't require as much attention as they're getting. And I don't know what those would be, various types of misdemeanors or things like that. Of course, now with medical marijuana playing into things, and recreational marijuana as well, the state right next door, Illinois, has made marijuana recreational. And so a lot of folks that live in the eastern part of our state probably like to go recreate over there in Illinois, and I'm sure some of them have gotten in trouble. Bernie Sanders said when he was on the debate stage the other night in South Dakota, saying that let's just legalize marijuana and expunge people's records. What are some of the things that we need to look at maybe here in the future, and maybe it wouldn't create quite the problem that it has?
Well, this is probably not a popular view, but this is a view that I've developed having gone to 35 states and various presentations, talking to judges, is that the real problem is that we assume that the criminal is going to help us fund the criminal justice system. And while, we all say they should pay restitution to, actual human victims, mm-hmm. we need to fund the criminal justice system more generally funded so that we don't have incentives to do certain things that are going to set defendants up to fail, because we know many of them are never going to pay. By saying they're going to pay, we know they're not. And, why are we going to go through this exercise? And so the answer is we actually need to spend more on criminal justice to do a better job, I think. And, that's not a popular view
no, it's not.
amongst
right.
many conservative legislators, but I think that's the answer.
Well, I guess we will definitely have to see how all of this plays out. And again, I wonder if it's going to take something major to happen, like, for example, let's say somebody who is arrested and released goes out and I'm sure maybe there are probably cases of this already occurring and on record somewhere, but somebody going out and committing such a heinous act after being released from prison or a jail, rather a much more violent act than they did. Maybe it was something petty that got them picked up in the first place. They got out and another opportunity presented itself, and they took it. And in the process, someone was injured, someone was killed, and depending on, I guess, the type of crime that was committed, maybe it's going to be it's going to have to be something that really wakes people up in order to get more attention focused on this particular subject. What do you think?
I think that's right, and I think once the New York media found out what was going on, every camera, every reporter was reporting, and what did we see? We saw anti-Semitic attacks. I mean, that's what ignited the fire in New York, was that we were letting hate criminals out. I got to think it's happening on a more widespread basis in Missouri. You just don't have a media the size of New York that's fixated on it like they are there. But you're right, one big high-profile case, and I think, we'll get a better sense of what's going on. And hopefully it won't be, I just hate that to be the situation that somebody has to be, severely injured or perhaps even killed to get people's attention on this.
Absolutely. It's unfortunate. That's a society that it seems like we live in this day and age. Jeffrey Clayton, he's the executive director of the American Bail Coalition. If people would like to find out more about this, Jeffrey, where can they go?
ambailcoalition.org, or follow us on Facebook or Twitter.
Appreciate the opportunity this morning. Thanks for joining us on the program. And, maybe we'll get a chance to talk a little bit later on after they make some strides in trying to either get this rescinded or at least come up with some sort of an alternate situation. Thank you, and I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.